We're
Good
streaming
afternoon
live.
and welcome to Virginia Family Network's Lunch and Learn for September. Today we are joined by Ann Moss Rogers, and she's going to give this great presentation in honor of or in recognition of Suicide Awareness Month. So Ann Moss, and yes, that's her first name. She is emotionally naked, motivational speaker who captivates hearts and fills them with hope. She is a suicide loss survivor, certified suicide prevention trainer, and our own NAMI board member, and the author of 2 books, Diary of a Broken Mind, and the latest book, Emotionally Naked, A Teacher's Guide to Preventing Suicide and Recognizing Students at Risk. So, Ann, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today for this important subject. And it's called The Emotionally Naked Truth About Student Suicide, and it's based on topics that we covered in the book. So I wanted to offer a trigger warning, and we have emotional content that is happening in today's presentation. So I wanted to put out the Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the Crisis Text Line. And if in any moment you feel triggered, walk away, take a deep breath and a moment to yourself, because suicide can be in the room in some very personal ways here. This is my son, Charles, and I'm gonna make it a little bigger. He was the funniest, most popular kid in school. Yet the funniest and most popular kid in school suffered from depression, became addicted to heroin, and took his life in 2015. Now, this is a picture of him on homecoming court in 2010 with his favorite teacher, Miss Fretwell. And it is one of my favorite pictures because he's making her laugh, and that's what he loved to do. But it wasn't long after this picture was taken that my son's drug use started to escalate. I didn't know why. And I struggled to find answers. I thought, well, is it because he's, wants to be in the in crowd? Is it because he's struggling with mental illness and he's self-medicating? And what we would learn later is that my son suffered from depression. And what I also didn't know was he was struggling with thoughts of suicide. And he was using drugs and alcohol as a way to sort of self-medicate his feelings of suicidality. And I can understand from a teenager's point of view that numbing those thoughts of suicide certainly wasn't that better than killing himself. Well, of course, what we want them to do is tell someone and get the support and the help that they need. But that's not what they did. And this is what a lot of teenagers will do. They'll go to drugs and alcohol to numb their feelings. So his drug use starts to escalate. We go everywhere in town to kind of figure out what to do, mental health professionals, programs, and we pretty much exhausted everything there was that we knew of in the area. Unfortunately, no one ever told us about support groups, which we were desperately searching for. In the meantime, we were meeting with a counselor about Charles, and he said, I'm really concerned about your son. I think it's time we take a really drastic step. And so we kidnapped our son out of his bed and we took him to a wilderness program. And you don't do that because you've caught your kid with a beer and a joint. You do that because you think your child's life is truly at risk. As you can tell from the picture, which I'll give you a close up, he didn't love wilderness. he was pretty angry at being yanked out of his bed at 5 a.m., put in the middle of the woods with no iPod and no cell phone and no link to his music and no electronics. Furthermore, he had to dig a hole in order to go to the bathroom. None of that was real popular. And I can understand that. And I hated the fact that we had to introduce to our child this awful trauma in order to kind of stop his current behavior, because I thought he's going to die if he keeps drinking and drugging like he is. So from Wilderness, they recommended he go to therapeutic boarding school. What is a therapeutic boarding school? Well, it is therapy and school together, and it's usually in some remote location off the grid. And he didn't love that any more than he loved Wilderness. But he ended up graduating around 2014, having spent about 22 months outside our home in some kind of placement. And he graduated from high school. And he was a really smart kid, but we had so many issues with the mental health in the schools that actually making that happen was a pretty expensive and difficult process. So what I didn't recognize when my son came back is that he went right back to using drugs and alcohol to numb his feelings of suicidality. At this point, I still don't know that he is suffering from thoughts of suicide, and I never knew until after his death by suicide. He becomes addicted to heroin. He is still living in my house, and for 10 months, he's using heroin, and he's using it in the evening, and we don't know about it. I'm seeing some odd behavior, but he's using late at night. And I don't know if the odd behavior is from mental illness or it is from the addiction, or, he's a quirky and odd kid. I mean, he was extremely popular, but Charles always saw things in a whole different way. So he'd been writing a lot of rap music, and this is one of the verses of one of his songs. And what I didn't recognize is my son had a lot more self-awareness of his drug use and how dangerous it was than I ever really realized. And one of my regrets is that I didn't meet my son where he was emotionally. And I kept trying to kind of push recovery and push, getting help and therapy and all these other things. At times, I probably just needed to back off, listen more, and lecture less. However, at this time, I was going to a support group, which was one of the best moves I ever made in my life. And the reason is because you're with other people who are struggling with the same issues. They also know the best resources, the best places to send your children. They have the best books, and they're active in that moment. And I went for 4.5 years, and I have to tell you, it really is one of the best moves I ever made. So it was June of 2015 that we got the worst news of our lives. We were sitting in the back of a police car in a parking lot when they said, "We found your son dead this morning." I was sure they were going to tell me overdose, but the method left no question that it was a suicide. And I didn't understand why suicide, and it would be a really long time before I would. I would run into people after that, and I would start to talk about my son, and they would cut me off mid-sentence and ask me mundane questions about my new house, because we had been in the throes of moving when he died, and we had to move. And I remember thinking, I want to talk about my child. And nobody seemed to want to listen. And I think there is a lot of fear talking to somebody who's lost a child, but particularly one to suicide and substance use disorder. So I started to think that I needed to be bold and start to speak out on this subject. So I wrote a newspaper article, and it took me 5 or 6 months to write this article. And I thought no one would ever read it, but it ended up going viral. And then I started a blog called Emotionally Naked to find healing through writing and shine a spotlight on all the taboo topics of mental illness, addiction, suicide, and all those things nobody wants to talk about, including grief. And then I wrote this article on my blog shortly before his death anniversary. And I remember feeling really guilty. It is about us getting the news of his death and how we felt. And it is blow by blow of bewailing and screaming and crying. And I thought, why am I sharing this with people? Who cares? Am I asking for pity by putting this out there? And then I realized 2 days later why I wrote this article. And that's because this young lady reached out to me and she said, 2 days ago, I thought about taking my life. Reading a post from a mother who's felt such devastating pain has changed my perspective on life. And the best part is she reached out to her own parents and she asked for help. And that was the first time I realized that people who are struggling with thoughts of suicide want desperately to tell someone, particularly teens and young adults, because they're frightened by these thoughts. They don't understand them. And they don't know how to tell or what to say when they do tell. So what I recognized shortly after that is that because the topic is so taboo, that a lot of kids will end up going to Google and searching for the information they want. And I also recognize that my own son probably Googled his method of killing himself, and that's where he got the instructions on how to put it all together. Because while Charles is a really smart kid, he was no engineer. And I was like, he had to look that up. And so I started by writing a particular article on Google that only people searching for this particular way to die would find. And I thought, well, I used to do this for plumbers and HVAC techs and for medical clients. Why won't it work for this? But I can't say I had a lot of confidence that it would work. And then one day I got this message. I know nothing will ever take away the pain you must feel, but one of your blogs you wrote on your website probably saved my life tonight. I know your son would be proud. I cried, and boy, it felt so good to actually have this work. And what this person is expressing is that they felt heard. They felt that I truly was a person that cared. And of course, every comment I get on YouTube or my website gets an answer, because here's this great big cold world and somebody answers, somebody listening, and somebody cares, makes a difference. Because I have thousands of these messages now and they never get old. So we're going to take a closer look at suicide and learn a little bit more about it. So we don't want to say or use the word committed. We want to say died by suicide, ended his life, and killed himself. Because there was some point in history, 1400s England, where suicide actually was a crime. And that's where the word committed comes from. Now we recognize it as a public health issue. So we want to use the phrases that are more applicable to that, being a public health issue and not a crime, because a crime makes people feel more shame. And we want to take away the stigma of this cause of death. Now, this is what we're kind of conditioned to look for when we're looking for depression or suicidal thoughts. And this is what I saw. I saw a funny, hilarious, adorable young man. I didn't see any of the sad figures that people show you. We'll also see kids who are frequent flyers at the school clinic or always going to the doctor for aches and pains, headaches, and sort of all these unexplained physical issues. And that doesn't mean they're not real. They are very real. We'll also see kids who are acting out, who are irritable and angry. And we will say they've got oppositional behavior, which they may actually have that diagnosis, but there may be another underlying reason that they're acting this way. So we should always explore the possibility that suicidality might come into play. So I'm going to make this large. Parents really love this. What is the difference between like regular teen angst and actual suicidal behavior? So, hey, kids withdraw from family and friends to spend more time with friends, right? I mean, that's typical. But it's when they withdraw from friends, family, and social activity, they're locking themselves in their room a lot. And that isolation sort of gives you this gut feeling that something isn't right. Wanting more privacy, totally and completely natural, but becoming secretive seems to be hiding something is more of a warning sign. So moving from childhood likes to teen pursuits, normal behavior, when it becomes concerning is when they lose interest in their favorite activities and they don't replace them with any other pursuits. So for example, there was a child who had been playing the violin since the age of 3. His parents never had to say, we need you to practice, we need you to do this. The kid always did it and he loved it. And then one day he said, I'm not going to do this anymore. And he didn't replace it. And that child did attempt suicide. So those sudden changes of mood are something we need to pay attention to. And what's going to happen is that one day you feel like this must be a warning sign, and then you have a good day, and then you push those thoughts away. And I totally get that. But it may be a time to start to have a conversation with your child on the subject and ask the question, are you thinking of suicide? And we're going to be getting into that in a moment so that you know kind of how to frame that question and bring it up, because it's a really scary question to ask. So many times we think that talking about suicide will give them the idea. And it's always the first question I get in any parent presentation. If I ask them about suicide, will it plant the idea in their head? And the answer is no. And our findings suggest that talking about suicide may reduce rather than increase those suicidal thoughts. So I'm going to make that big so you can see it. And there have been many studies on this. And even when you talk with people with lived experience or people who are struggling currently with thoughts, they will tell you, if someone was talking about it, I would be more open to talking about it and asking for help. And that's what we want to promote, right? We want to promote that help-seeking behavior. Parents love this slide because it sort of explains what the suicidal experience is. And this was told to me by a teenager. And it is not everybody's experience, I'll say that, but it is, several people have explained it in a similar way. So it's about 20 minutes long for a lot of people. It can be 5 minutes, it can be 5 hours, but 20 minutes is kind of average. And in that time, there are kind of peaks and valleys where they feel more at risk for following through with their thoughts of suicide, and then times where they feel more ambivalent towards taking their life. So they want to live at the same time they want to die, and it's very confusing. And I want you to know that usually life wins, life and the will to live is a very strong instinct. But at no point in this entire continuum does anybody never feel any ambivalence. There is always ambivalence to dying by suicide. So we need to understand that, and that's where listening is very, very important. So a lot of times we think about suicide as being this thing that happens, such as, okay, they're being bullied and that's why they want to die by suicide. Nobody ever wants to die by suicide for one reason alone. It is always kind of a mixture of different reasons having to do with health history and environment. Environment being their psychosocial, it could be a parent divorce going on, a breakup. History, meaning kind of family history. Is there a family history of mental illness and suicide? And what about their health history? Is there the history of physical abuse, emotional abuse, or, problems with heart or diabetes or something else? So it's a constellation of issues that make a teen more vulnerable to suicide. So when are teenagers most at risk for suicide? And there are two times. So again, nobody suicides for one reason. They are more vulnerable because of mental illness or trauma or other things happening in their lives. And these are kind of the last straw. So during transitions, and many transitions is often when we see children youth attempt or die by suicide. Now, what is a mini transition or a transition altogether? Middle to high school, summer to back to school, from school to holiday break, from holiday break back to school, from college to real life. So it's not only those big transitions like from high school to college, we also count those real small ones, that summer break, back to school, or holiday break and back to school. So knowing that, how can we set expectations for our youth so that they understand these are awkward and anxiety provoking moments? And I think one way is we tell our own stories. I remember being on the phone with my son and talking about going to the first networking event, in this COVID pandemic, and how weird it felt, and how I forgot my name tag, I forgot my business cards, and we laughed about how awkward and weird it was to be all together. So sharing your own stories of how that happens. And when I say set expectations, I don't mean saying this is when most kids die by suicide, just saying that we know that transitions are difficult to teenagers. And then asking them how they may cope with it and set that expectation. It's going to feel weird and awkward, and, until you kind of get used to being in that environment again. Number two is relationship disruption. What is a relationship disruption? So it could be a move from one district to another, one state to another, one country to another. It could be losing a loved one to COVID, to suicide, to an accident. What I see very often is that kids will be thinking about suicide after they've had a fight or a breakup with somebody. So it's not always a romantic breakup. Oftentimes it is the result of a fight within the family, fight with a parent, fight with a sister, brother, best friend. And again, these are those kind of last straw that kind of trigger them into that suicidal thought process, and they can attempt or die by suicide during these times. So what are some of the things that they say? They talk about ending their life, having no reason to live, being a burden. That's a big one. And they talk about not liking the person in the mirror. They talk about feeling trapped, unbearable pain. And then they may be ghosting, and that's a teenage phrase, kind of isolating, drinking, drugging, kind of an escalation of negative or oppositional behavior. But what's most important is you get a gut feeling that something isn't right. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is follow that gut feeling. So how does a cute, fun, bubbly young toddler, grow up, become depressed, addicted to heroin, and die by suicide? And this is a picture of my sweet boy in his Halloween costume when he was 3 years old. He's pretty cute. So I'm going to share with you some of my son's last tweets so that you see kind of what they'll even say on social media, and you can recognize those as cries for help. If I died, no one would notice for at least a month. If you want to see who really cares about you, see who's there when you have nothing. Death sounds nice. Now, I remember seeing these, or I didn't see all of those. I saw only one of them. And somebody sent me a screenshot because I was actually blocked from his social media accounts. And I remember thinking, oh, he's reached rock bottom with his heroin addiction. And now he's going to reach out and ask for help. Because at this time, he had been at detox and he had walked out with a friend, and we didn't know where he was for 2 weeks. So I thought, oh, okay, he's going to come to me when what I needed to do was reach out, find my child, and go scoop him up wherever he was. And I'm not blaming myself because I didn't know that at the time. And we really did all that we thought we could do. We were a normal family. We did normal family things. And what I realized is that I needed to forgive myself. I didn't need to hold myself hostage for like 2% of parenting that I didn't do right. We had birthday parties, we made cakes together, we went to museums, we played, we did things as a family, we went to beach trips. My kids were involved in all sorts of activities. It wasn't this one thing that I did that created this problem. And I remember avoiding all those VHS movies at first. I didn't want to watch them because I thought they would be too difficult. But what I realized is my son grew up in a house of love. And if love had been enough, he'd still be alive today. So when I interviewed Jessica Chalk Goldman for my book, she said something very interesting. I've learned to ask every student that comes by my office if they are thinking of suicide. If they are talking about it, so should we. So a lot of you are thinking, now, how am I even going to bring up this subject? And there are many ways. So if you've heard about one at a school, you just start to talk about it, to start to talk to your child about how it makes you feel and what you are curious about and wonder about. Start that conversation. It's difficult, but they're all talking about it. Like Jessica said, if they're talking about it, so should we. And if we avoid the conversation, they're not going to ask for help. So what can parents do? Because I know this is what you've all been waiting for. First of all, listen more and lecture less. Because when has lecturing ever worked? When have you sat down and go, oh yes, my father or mother told me yada yada, and I totally went and did all that they said? Lecturing doesn't work. Asking questions is a far better way to do things. What we want them to do is build their own skills at problem solving. So if we ask questions, they start to think about solutions and ways to resolve those problems. And some of them are not going to be right. And guess what? They may fail a math class because of it. And that's not going to ruin their lives. Avoid minimizing their feelings. And we'll have some specific examples of what I mean by that in a few minutes. So what we often want to do is to say, you have so much to live for, or we want to say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or you got this, when we really need to just kind of shut up and say, tell me more about how you feel. What are you thinking? And again, say things like, how long have you felt this way? How can we support you? You want them to feel like they have been heard. Because think about when you talk about a problem and somebody just dives in right away and starts fixing. It's annoying, right? So we shouldn't be doing that as well. Avoid trying to convince them that life is worth living. They're not in that place right now. They can't imagine it, because those feelings of suicide create kind of a tunnel vision where they can't see all that in the future. And if you kind of try to push them there, they're going to resist, or they're going to shut down and they're going to stop talking to you. And that's not what you want to happen. You want to continue that conversation. Avoid advice on how to fix it. You could say something like, I don't know all the steps. I don't have all the answers, but I'm in this with you. So first of all, it's important to ask the question, are you thinking of suicide? And you can reframe that by saying, lots of times when kids have called from college and they've expressed, distress over classes, I can't do this anymore, they're thinking of suicide. Are you thinking of suicide? You'll be surprised at how quickly they'll say yes if they are, or no if they're not. So say this, I'm grateful you shared this with me. I know it was hard. Instead of something like, you're just trying to get attention. So you want to express that they have told you their deepest, darkest, ugliest secret in their soul. They have told you, they have trusted you with this. And there's no other thought other than, wow, that must have been really hard. And I'll tell you, a lot of the kids I hear from online will tell me that they have struggled with thoughts of suicide since they were 7 or 8 years old, and now they're 15. So what has happened is that these thoughts of suicide and this fear of telling has taken up maximum real estate in their brain, and it's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger over the years. So just the telling of it often is so helpful to kids who are struggling with thoughts of suicide. So say something like, tell me more about how you feel. And don't say, you have so much to live for. So this is just an example of what we were talking about earlier. So say something like, I'm unsure of the next step, but we'll figure this out together, okay? So in that instance, you're showing partnership and support. Like, I'm not the perfect parent, I don't have all the answers, but I'm with you. And we're gonna figure this out together. And you don't want to say anything like, promise you won't attempt suicide, because we can't make a contract with kids. You know, that's just not gonna work, because you're asking them to do something that's not possible. They don't have control over this. They don't know what's driving it. And at this point, you might not either. So what do you do after that? You don't want to leave somebody who is struggling with thoughts of suicide. You want to connect them to help. And you kind of have to think through those steps given your situation. Are you texting? Are you on the phone? Are they out of town? Are they with you at the time? One thing you can do is you can reach out to the crisis text line or suicide hotline yourself. 911 is usually a last resort. That can be a really scary experience. There may be times where you absolutely have to go that route because they're not answering. They're on a bridge somewhere and you don't know where they are. But you can think through, like if they're on a college campus, there are often crisis lines you can call on campus. And I had to do that for a student one time. And it was hard to do. And she was angry with me afterwards, but I would rather have her mad than angry. And when I called campus police, I said, are you crisis trained? And I made him explain how he would approach the student so she wouldn't feel threatened. So you got to kind of think through. And here in Virginia, we have community service boards, and each county has a crisis line. And I would suggest that you learn, if you're in Prince George, find out the Prince George crisis line or Chesterfield mental health. And oftentimes you can call those crisis lines and get advice. You can call together and talk together with the person who is struggling, if it's your child, and you can get assistance. What you want to ask for is a suicide risk assessment and then a psychological evaluation. So this actually should be flipped. That's my fault. So you want to know what the results of that suicide risk assessment, because it may be that they come home, it may be that they need something outpatient, it may be that the threat of suicide has dissipated and you need somebody to evaluate that. And ultimately, you want a psychological evaluation to understand if there's an underlying mental illness. They will resist a lot of times giving you that psychological evaluation. Use those words, keep pushing for it, because they'll say, well, we can't judge if it's bipolar because, you know, he's only 18, and they'll give you 100 reasons. And then guess what? That's the same thing they'll tell you at the age of 25. They can do a diagnostic and start to give you some answers. How do I fix this? I know that's what you want to know. And the answer is, you can fix yourself. You can provide your child with help and support and love and meet them where they are, but you can't fix this problem for them. You can't usher them into healing. And by trying to push them and do it for them, you're further fragilizing them. And this is the opportunity for them to build resilience and coping skills. And that's what you want to happen. So the answer is, you need to get support for you first. You need to start to understand what this is all about, how you need to shift as a family, how you need to shift those conversations. And NAMI has family support groups for this. No one told me about the support groups when I was going through this, and I was asking mental health professionals, and this is back in 2015, please get support for yourself. It's available online and in person. And if you really want to fix this, you've got to concentrate and put your oxygen mask on first, like they tell you in all the airplanes. Another group that I did was NAMI family to family classes, and they often are 8 weeks, once a week, and it helps you with communications and understanding the different mental illnesses and how you can live with a family member who lives with a mental illness. Finally, we're going to talk a minute about your home and how you can prevent suicide, because what we find is the time between thought and action for teenagers is far shorter than your general population. So what I'm saying is, if they are in that 20 minutes of thinking about suicide and they have the means to end their life, they are more at risk of ending their life. If they don't have the means handy, they're less likely to die by suicide. So if you have a firearm in your home, please store it safely, not under your pillow, not in your bed nightstand, but maybe a thumbprint safe. And think of ways that would keep your family safe. So I interviewed a student one time, and he said, oh yeah, well, my parents think that they hid the gun, but actually it's locked in my dad's office. And he described how he actually went outside, went up the side of the trellis, went on the roof, opened his father's window to his office, crawled in, had the key to his drawer, and got his dad's gun. And he said, I sat there holding it. And he didn't follow through with his thoughts of suicide, because fortunately by then they had dissipated. But it just goes to show you that when they feel that determination and they're in that agonizing moment of pain, they're trying to stop that pain, and they will go to great lengths to find something. So find a way to secure that weapon, even if you're giving it to somebody to babysit. Be a role model. If you come home and you say, oh, I can't relax, I need a glass of wine, what are you saying to your kids? You're saying, I need a substance in order to manage my life. It would be healthier if you said, oh, I've had such a day. You know what? Can you take a walk with me around the block? I'm just so angry and I need to really pound the pavement to work through this. You're role modeling a positive way to cope with your emotions. Clear out medications. So again, this is kind of like removing what we call removing means. So lots of times kids will attempt suicide by taking a lot of Tylenol. Do not buy those humongo bottles from Costco. Whenever you can, get blister packs, because just the moment that they're having to punch them all out minimizes the risk that they'll do serious damage to their liver, because that's what even Tylenol can do. If you have prescription medications, there are many take backs. So look for the take backs in your community. I know that Chesterfield Mental Health has disposal bags that you can put, leftover prescriptions. And I believe a lot of police stations also have places where you can get rid of old medications. So you don't want to just flush them. You want to get rid of them the right way, and do that as soon as possible. You don't really need to have a lot of extra medications in your cabinet. So, sort of recap, help them build coping skills. And I have a guide in a minute that you can download free. Find support for you. We talked about that NAMI has family to family and also peer family support classes and get educated, which you're already doing today. Thank you for that. But keep looking for the educational opportunities. Now, this is a guide that I have free on my website, 9 ways to help your kids build resilience. I read all these books, and basically this is 12 pages, and it really condenses down those methods of really changing your relationship with your child, where you're asking more questions, listening more, lecturing less, and giving them a moment where they start to have those critical thinking skills. So they make a bad grade on something, instead of, taking away the car keys and using all these punitive measures, just ask them, well, what do you think you'll do differently next time? Let them figure it out. You're worried about them getting in some great college. Don't miss this opportunity to build that resilience so that when they go off to college, they have the skills to cope with a new and difficult transition and situation. You can find this at amos.com/shop. And then you'll see a lot of different books, and just scroll down until you see this on the page. Missed one. I also have an article. My son has admitted he is suicidal. What do I do now? And that will kind of give you, those of you who are sitting there going, it's just happened, he was just released, or she, and I don't know what to do. And you're freaking out because you think, I need to be on suicide watch 24/7. I need to camp out beside them. And that's going to make them feel a little smothered, right? They're not going to like that. We can kind of guarantee that. So this is kind of a way for you to get your brain back attached, your thinking brain attached to your real brain, so it doesn't go flying off into the emotional atmosphere. I am a Safe Talk trainer. So that means it's a half day, 3.5 hour program. So if you want to bring that into your workplace, let me know. I just finished training a lot of the YMCA youth leaders in this, because I figured they're going to talk to these youth leaders if they're struggling. The new book is called Emotionally Naked, A Teacher's Guide to Preventing Suicide and Recognizing Students at Risk. It has recently been vetted by the Jed Foundation as one of their recommended resources. And holding the book is a young lady who's an excerpt from her English paper was included in the book, and she is 15 years old and lives in New Jersey. My first book is Diary of a Broken Mind, and it's a memoir. And this is my lovely son, Charles. And, it's funny, and as talented as he was, his greatest gift was letting other people know that they matter. And that is the legacy that I carry forward every single day of his life. I want to thank you for watching what is really a very emotional and difficult presentation, but I hope you have some takeaways from it today. And if you want to reach out, I have a contact form on my website, and that is amosrogers.com and emotionallynaked.com, or amos.com. I'm not hard to find. All you have to do is Google me. I'm there. In fact, if you're a stalker, I'm in real trouble because I'm all over the place. So I hope you'll reach out, and I hope you'll download the Resilience book. So if we have any questions, Nicole, I can take any. I'm not sure if we have any, but I'll leave that up to you.
So we didn't get any questions, although we have had quite a few people with us watching today. Within our chat, I also put the link for the free books. But the really good thing is it's right there within your website, so they can kind of look around and see what else you have. Um, Beth was one of the people watching us, and she just wanted to say thank you, and that it was such a powerful and so much information. I really liked the say this, not that. I know for myself, just starting the conversation is really hard. Not only about this topic, but kind of any topic that has to do with how is your mental health. Sometimes checking in with my kiddos is hard, and I know they're having a hard time, but just having the right words to say. So the say this was really nice to at least get started and being able to take it from there as the conversation goes. Um, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. This was such a great presentation, and it had so many great tips, and thank you for sharing so much about you and your son.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much. I'm always in awe and very appreciative when anybody wants to present on this subject, because for 5 years or 10 years, really, I struggled with a lot of rejection when I would bring it up, but I kept pushing, and a lot of us, continue to do so. And I know Beth had lost her child, her son, to suicide, so she knows exactly what I mean.
And just like you had said before, talking about it is not going to make them want to do it anymore. So we need to make this a very normal conversation of what to be aware of and how to help not only our own families, but others.
Yeah, I think that normalizing the conversation is really, really hard for us to do, because we have this big generation gap of it was so cloaked in silence for our generation. It's more open for theirs. And we haven't quite bridged that gap, which is why I often go speak with youth leaders and teenagers, so that it kind of has that trickle up effect. And so that the adults in their life will start speaking about it because the kids are. They want us to. And I also want to encourage them to start mental health clubs at their school and normalize the conversation around the topic.
So again, thank you so much for being with us, and hopefully there are times where we can work together more.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thanks so much. And again, I appreciate everybody tuning in today.